At 3 a.m., my son-in-law was scrubbing in the sink. What he said froze me. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 71 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at a family. I was wrong. That cold February night changed everything I thought I knew about the man my daughter Sarah married 12 years ago. Let me tell you how this all started, because what happened that night in our kitchen revealed secrets that would shake our family to its core. But it also taught me that sometimes the most frightening discoveries can lead to the most beautiful transformations. I'd been living with Sarah and her husband David for 8 months by then. After my Frank passed from a sudden heart attack, the big house we'd shared for 43 years felt like a tomb. Every corner held memories. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like his footsteps. Sarah insisted I move in with them and their 2 kids, Emma, who's 14, and Lucas, who's 16. At first, I resisted. Nobody wants to be the burden, the third wheel in their child's marriage. I'd raised Sarah to be independent, to build her own life, and here I was potentially disrupting the family she'd created. But loneliness has a way of wearing you down, and eventually, when the walls of that empty house started feeling like they were closing in, I agreed. Their house sits on Maple Street in suburban Portland, Oregon. It's one of those quiet neighborhoods where everyone knows each other's business, where kids still ride bikes in the street and neighbors wave from their front porches. The house itself is a 2-story colonial with cream-colored siding and a wraparound porch where I like to sit in the mornings with my coffee, watching the world wake up. My room is upstairs, right next to the kids' rooms. It used to be David's home office, but he moved all his work stuff to the basement to make space for me. I appreciated that gesture. It showed me he genuinely wanted me there, that I wasn't just being tolerated. Sarah and David sleep in the master bedroom downstairs, near the kitchen and living room. David works as a financial advisor at a downtown firm called Morrison & Associates. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, he leaves in his navy blue Honda Civic, briefcase in hand, dressed in one of his conservative gray or navy suits. He's methodical, predictable, the kind of man who pays bills 2 weeks early, keeps his car spotless, and has never missed a day of work in the 12 years I've known him. Sarah always said she fell in love with his stability after dating too many unpredictable men in her 20s. After her first boyfriend cheated on her, and her second one couldn't hold down a job, David's reliability was exactly what she needed. He proposed on schedule, married her in a perfectly planned ceremony, and they've lived a perfectly organized life ever since. Or so I thought. That night, February 18th, I woke up around 2:45 a.m. with one of my splitting headaches. At my age, sleep comes in fragments anyway. Between arthritis pain, worries about the kids, and just the general aches and pains of a 71-year-old body, a full night's sleep is more hope than expectation. But this headache was particularly vicious, the kind that feels like someone's taking a hammer to your skull. I keep my prescription pain medication in the kitchen cabinet, down with all the other family medicines. Frank always said it was safer to keep everything in one place where we could keep track of it. So I put on my old terry cloth robe, the faded pink one with little roses that Sarah bought me 3 Christmases ago, and slipped my feet into my fuzzy blue slippers. The house had that particular kind of silence that only exists in the deep hours of the night. It's different from daytime quiet. During the day, even when no one's talking, there's life in a house. You can feel people breathing, moving, existing. But at 3 a.m., it's like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for dawn to give it permission to live again. I made my way slowly to the staircase. My arthritis makes each step deliberate, especially going downstairs. I have to grip the banister with both hands and take my time. The wooden stairs in this old house creak no matter how carefully you step, and I was doing my best not to wake anyone. Sarah's always been a light sleeper, and the last thing I wanted was to disturb the whole family, just because I needed my headache medicine. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it. A soft but distinct sound coming from the direction of the kitchen. Water running and something else. A rhythmic scrubbing sound, like someone cleaning something with great determination. Not the gentle swish of someone washing a few dinner dishes, but something more intense, more purposeful. My heart started beating faster. Who would be in the kitchen at this hour? The kids were definitely asleep. I could hear Lucas's faint snoring from upstairs, and Emma never got up during the night unless she was sick. Sarah and David's bedroom was on the other side of the house, and I hadn't heard any movement from their direction. My first thought was a burglar, but that didn't make sense. What kind of thief breaks into someone's house to do dishes? Then I worried it might be one of the kids, maybe sick and trying to clean up, or having some kind of sleepwalking episode. But as I moved closer to the kitchen, staying in the shadows of the hallway, I realized the sounds were too purposeful, too adult, too controlled. The kitchen was at the back of the house, connected to the living room by a short hallway. I pressed myself against the wall and carefully peered around the corner. The overhead light wasn't on, but the window over the sink let in enough moonlight and streetlight glow to see clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. David was standing at the sink, his back to me, wearing only a white t-shirt and his plaid pajama pants. His sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, and his arms were moving in strong, deliberate motions. He was scrubbing something large and dark, something that caught the dim light in ways that made my stomach clench with worry. On the counter beside him, I could see what looked like cleaning supplies, but not the normal household cleaners we kept under the sink. These were bottles and containers I didn't recognize, cloths scattered around, and what looked like rubber gloves draped over the edge of the counter. The whole scene looked wrong, secretive, almost sinister in the half-darkness. I stood there frozen in the hallway, watching my son-in-law work with an intensity I'd never seen from him. This wasn't the methodical, calm David I knew. His movements were urgent, almost frantic, like he was trying to remove something that didn't want to come off. The water kept running, and whatever he was cleaning seemed to require constant rinsing. Questions flooded my mind. What was he cleaning? Why was he doing it in secret, in the middle of the night? Why did he have all these supplies that I'd never seen before? And most disturbing of all, why did the whole scene feel so wrong, so threatening? I watched him for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid he would hear it. Part of me wanted to retreat, to go back upstairs and pretend I'd never seen anything, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the mystery unfolding in front of me. Then, as I shifted my weight to get a better view, the old floorboard beneath my feet let out a loud creak. David spun around, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. In the dim light, I could see his face clearly for the first time, and what I saw there made my heart stop. This wasn't just surprise at being discovered. This was the look of a man who had been caught doing something he desperately didn't want anyone to know about. If you want to know what happened next, make sure to subscribe to this channel, because what David said to me in that moment changed everything I thought I knew about my family. And what I discovered about his secret would either tear us apart or bring us closer together than we'd ever been before. But first, I had to figure out exactly what my son-in-law was hiding in the middle of the night. For a moment that felt like an eternity. David and I just stared at each other across the dimly lit kitchen. His eyes were wide with shock, his mouth slightly open like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. In his hands, he clutched whatever he'd been scrubbing, holding it against his chest, as if trying to hide it from view. Now that I could see him clearly in the pale light filtering through the window, I noticed details that made my fear spike even higher. His t-shirt was damp with what looked like water, but there were darker stains that I couldn't identify. His hands, gripped around the mysterious object, appeared to have some kind of residue on them, something that glistened wetly in the moonlight. The kitchen counter told its own disturbing story. Spread across the surface were bottles of chemicals I'd never seen before. Not the usual dish soap or household cleaners, but professional-looking containers with labels I couldn't read from my position in the doorway. There were several different types of cloths, some clean, others stained and crumpled. A pair of yellow rubber gloves lay draped over the sink edge, and I could see what looked like steel wool and other abrasive materials scattered around. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. Was David involved in something illegal? Had he hurt someone? The way he was holding that object, protecting it so desperately, made my stomach turn with dread. In all the years I'd known him, through holidays and family gatherings, through Sarah's pregnancy scares and the kids' teenage dramas, I'd never seen David look scared. But right now, he looked terrified. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the steady drip of the faucet and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still gripping the wall for support, unsure whether I should run, scream, or demand an explanation. My internal conflict was overwhelming. Should I confront him directly? Should I back away quietly and call Sarah? Should I call the police? Part of me, the part that had known David for over a decade, that had watched him coach Lucas's little league team and help Emma with her math homework, wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. But another part of me, the part that had lived long enough to know that people can surprise you in terrible ways, was screaming that something was very, very wrong. David was the first to break the silence. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice hoarse and strained. You shouldn't be down here." That wasn't what I expected him to say, and it definitely wasn't reassuring. Not, "Oh, you startled me," or "I couldn't sleep either." Instead, he was telling me I shouldn't be in my own family's kitchen. That made my fear transform into something else, determination. I stepped fully into the kitchen, letting go of the wall. "David," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite my racing heart. "What are you doing? What is that in your hands?" He took a step back, bumping into the counter behind him. The movement caused some of the bottles to rattle, and I heard liquid sloshing in one of the containers. "It's nothing," he said quickly, but his voice cracked on the words. I couldn't sleep, so I was cleaning some things." "Cleaning what things?" I pressed, moving closer despite every instinct telling me to keep my distance. "And why do you need all these—" I gestured at the array of supplies. "Whatever these are." David's eyes darted around the kitchen as if looking for an escape route. He was still clutching the object to his chest, and now I could see it was larger than I'd initially thought. Maybe the size of a serving tray, but with an irregular shape that caught the light strangely. It's just some old family stuff," he stammered. "Things that needed some attention. I didn't want to bother anyone during the day, so I figured I'd take care of it now." But his explanation didn't make sense. If he was just cleaning family items, why did he look so guilty? Why did he have what appeared to be industrial-strength chemicals? Why was he acting like I'd caught him committing a crime? "David," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and non-threatening. "You're scaring me. Can you please just show me what you're working on? If it's family stuff, then I might even be able to help." He shook his head vigorously. No, you don't understand. It's complicated. It's something I need to handle myself." "Handle?" The word sent another chill through me. "David, what exactly are you handling at 3 a.m. that requires all this secrecy?" I could see him weighing his options, his jaw clenching and unclenching. The David I knew was decisive, confident in his choices. This person in front of me seemed lost, desperate, caught between equally bad options. "Look, Margaret," he finally said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "I know this looks strange, but I promise you, it's nothing dangerous, nothing illegal. It's personal, something I need to work through on my own, but that only made me more suspicious. In my experience, when someone starts insisting that something isn't dangerous or illegal without being asked, it usually means they're worried you might think exactly that. David, I've been part of this family for 8 months now, and part of your extended family for 12 years, I said firmly. We don't keep secrets from each other. Not secrets that involve sneaking around in the middle of the night with mysterious chemicals. His face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like relief mixed with his fear, like part of him wanted to tell me the truth but didn't know how. "You wouldn't understand," he whispered. "Nobody would understand." "Try me," I challenged. "I've lived through a lot of things that people thought I wouldn't understand." I'm tougher than I look. David looked down at the object in his hands, then back up at me. His expression shifted, and I saw something new there, not just fear, but shame. Deep, profound shame that seemed to be eating him alive. "Margaret, please," he said, his voice barely audible. "Please just go back to bed. Pretend you didn't see any of this. I'll be done soon, and then everything can go back to normal." But I knew that was impossible. There was no going back to normal after this. Whatever David was hiding, whatever he was doing in our kitchen in the middle of the night, it had already changed everything. "I can't do that, David," I said quietly. "I can't pretend I didn't see this. You're part of my family, which means your problems are my problems too." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him making some kind of internal calculation. His grip on the object loosened slightly, and his shoulders sagged as if he was carrying an enormous weight. That's when he said something that changed everything. "Margaret, I haven't been honest with anyone. Not with you, not with Sarah, not with the kids. And if they find out the truth, it's going to destroy this family." David's words hung in the air like a threat. "If they find out the truth, it's going to destroy this family." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. Whatever he was hiding, running away wasn't going to solve anything. "David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "you need to tell me what's going on. Right now." He looked down at the object in his hands, then slowly, reluctantly, turned it toward the light. What I saw made me blink in confusion rather than fear. It wasn't anything sinister or dangerous. It was an ornate silver tea set, a teapot, creamer, sugar bowl, and what looked like a serving tray, all tarnished and dark with age. This is my grandmother's silver tea service," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "It belonged to my mother's family." I stared at the tea set, then back at David's face. The relief I felt was immediate but quickly replaced by confusion. This was what had him so terrified. This was what he thought would destroy the family. "David, it's a tea set," I said, stepping closer to get a better look. "Why would cleaning your grandmother's silver destroy anything?" He set the pieces carefully on the counter, and I could see them properly for the first time. Even tarnished and dark, the craftsmanship was exquisite. The teapot had elaborate engravings of roses and vines, and the handles were shaped like delicate branches. These weren't just family pieces. They were genuine antiques, probably quite valuable. "It's not just about cleaning it," David said, running his hands through his hair and leaving damp streaks. I was planning to surprise Sarah with it for her birthday next month. She's always loved this set, ever since the first time she saw it at my mother's house. But it's been sitting in our attic for years, just getting darker and more tarnished. I looked at the array of chemicals and supplies on the counter with new understanding. These weren't sinister cleaning products. They were silver polish, tarnish remover, and restoration supplies. The rubber gloves, the steel wool, the various cloths, they were all for silver restoration. "So you decided to restore it as a birthday surprise," I said slowly. "That's actually very thoughtful, David. But why all the secrecy? Why are you doing this at 3 a.m. like you're conducting some kind of covert operation?" David's face flushed red and he looked away. Because I wanted it to be perfect. Sarah deserves perfect, and I've never done anything like this before. What if I ruined it? What if I destroyed a family heirloom trying to make it beautiful? The tea set had quite a history, actually. David had told me about it before, during one of our Sunday family dinners. It had belonged to his great-grandmother, who brought it with her when she emigrated from Ireland in the 1920s. It was one of the few valuable possessions she'd managed to keep during the difficult years of establishing a new life in America. When David's grandmother died, she left it to his mother. And when his mother passed away 3 years ago, it came to him. Sarah had indeed always admired it. I remembered her running her fingers over the intricate patterns when we visited David's mother, talking about how elegant it was, how it represented a connection to family history. When it came into their possession, Sarah had wanted to display it, but David insisted it was too valuable to leave out where the kids might damage it. So it had been carefully wrapped and stored in the attic, waiting for the right occasion. "David," I said gently, "this is lovely, really. But you still haven't explained why you're doing this in secret, in the middle of the night. If you were worried about ruining it, you could have asked for help. Sarah would have been thrilled to work on it with you." His nervousness was still palpable. He kept fidgeting with one of the cleaning cloths, wrapping and unwrapping it around his fingers. "You don't understand, Margaret. I've been working on this for weeks. Weeks. I stay up after everyone goes to bed, researching techniques online, watching YouTube videos, ordering special supplies. I've become obsessed with getting it right." I looked at him more carefully. Now that he mentioned it, I had noticed he'd been looking tired lately. Dark circles under his eyes, yawning during dinner conversations, seeming distracted during family time. I'd assumed it was work stress. Tax season is always busy for financial advisors. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. "Almost 2 months," he admitted. I started small, just with the sugar bowl. It took me 3 weeks to figure out how to clean it properly without damaging the engravings. Then I moved on to the creamer, then the teapot. This tray is the last piece. 2 months of secret midnight restoration work. No wonder he looked exhausted. But something still didn't add up. The level of secrecy, the fear in his eyes when I discovered him, the way he'd said it would destroy the family. It seemed like a massive overreaction to a birthday surprise project. "David, I still don't understand why you're so scared," I said. "So what if Sarah found out early? So what if you made a mistake and needed to get it professionally restored? These things happen. It's the thought that counts." He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the tea service. When he looked up at me, his expression was tortured. "Because this isn't just about the tea set, Margaret. This project, it's been keeping me sane. It's been the only thing keeping me together." "What do you mean?" He leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. "Work has been difficult lately, really difficult. I've been under enormous pressure, making some bad calls with client portfolios. The market's been unpredictable, and I've been second-guessing myself constantly. Some nights I lie awake terrified that I'm going to lose everything, that I'm going to fail my family." This was news to me. David had always seemed so confident about his career, so steady and reliable. To hear him admit to fear and self-doubt was surprising. "When I started working on this tea set," he continued, "it was the first time in months that I felt competent, like I was good at something, like I could take something tarnished and damaged and make it beautiful again. It became my escape from all the stress and anxiety." I was starting to understand his attachment to the project, but it still didn't explain the level of secrecy. "But David, why couldn't you tell Sarah about this? She would have understood about the work stress. She would have supported you." He shook his head. "Sarah married a successful financial advisor, Margaret. She married someone stable and dependable. What if she knew how much I've been struggling? What if she knew that some nights I come home and feel like a complete failure?" The vulnerability in his voice was heartbreaking. Here was this man I'd always seen as the rock of the family, admitting that he felt like he was falling apart. "And if I ruined this tea set," he continued, "if I destroyed this family heirloom trying to surprise her, it would just be more proof that I can't do anything right anymore." I looked at the tea service again. From what I could see, his work was actually quite impressive. The pieces he'd completed had a warm, lustrous shine that brought out every detail of the engravings. Far from ruining them, he'd restored them to their original beauty. "David, your work looks beautiful," I said. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished." But even as I said it, I could see there was still something he wasn't telling me. The way he avoided my eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand shook slightly when he picked up the cleaning cloth. There was more to this story. But what I discovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my son-in-law, because David's explanation, while touching, didn't quite add up. The elaborate setup, the professional-grade supplies, the level of expertise I was seeing in his restoration work. This wasn't just a hobbyist working on a surprise gift. There was something else going on here, something David still wasn't ready to tell me. After David and I finished our conversation in the kitchen that night, I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. His explanation about the tea set made sense on the surface, but something in my gut told me there was more to the story. I'd lived too long and seen too much to ignore that feeling. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to the patterns in our household, things I'd noticed but hadn't really thought about before. David's behavior had definitely changed over the past few months, and now that I was actively watching, the signs were everywhere. For one thing, his schedule had become erratic. David used to be clockwork, out the door at 7:30 a.m., home by 6:15 p.m., dinner at 7 sharp. But lately, he'd been leaving at different times, sometimes as early as 7 a.m., sometimes not until after 8 hours. His return times were just as unpredictable. Some days he'd walk in at 5:30, other days not until after 8 p.m. When Sarah would ask about the irregular hours, he'd give vague answers about client meetings, market volatility requiring longer days, or new compliance training sessions. Each explanation sounded reasonable in isolation, but taken together, they painted a picture of someone whose work life had become chaotic. Then there were the phone calls. David had always been professional about taking work calls at home, usually stepping into his basement office and speaking in his normal, controlled voice. But recently, I'd noticed him taking calls outside on the back porch, even in cold weather, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. A few times I'd seen him pacing back and forth while talking, running his free hand through his hair in obvious frustration. The financial concerns were harder to pin down, but definitely present. I'd noticed bills arriving later than usual, not late enough to cause problems, but later than David's typical early payment pattern. The cable bill that used to arrive and disappear within a day now sat on the kitchen counter for nearly a week. Same with the electric bill and the mortgage statement. One afternoon, while David was at work and the kids were at school, Sarah confided in me about her growing worries. We were folding laundry together in the living room, one of those comfortable mother-daughter activities that makes conversation flow naturally. "Mom, I'm worried about David," she said, shaking out one of Lucas's t-shirts with more force than necessary. "He's been so different lately. Distant, preoccupied. Some nights he barely touches his dinner." I looked up from the pillowcase I was folding. "Different how?" "It's hard to explain," Sarah continued, sitting down heavily on the couch with a basket of towels. "He's always been focused on work, you know that. But this feels different. He's anxious all the time. He jumps when the phone rings. He checks his email obsessively, even during family time. Last Sunday during Emma's soccer game, he spent the entire match staring at his phone instead of watching her play. That was significant. David never missed Emma's big moments. He was the dad who cheered the loudest, who knew every player's name, who took pictures of every goal attempt whether she made it or not. "Have you tried talking to him about it?" I asked. Sarah nodded, frustration clear in her voice. "Every time I bring it up, he brushes me off. Says everything's fine, just a busy period at work. But Mom, I've been married to him for 12 years. I know when something's wrong. She was right to be concerned. Even I, living in the house for less than a year, could see the changes in David's behavior. The question was what was causing them. That evening, I decided to pay closer attention to David's stories about his day. During dinner, I asked him specific questions about his work, the kind of casual inquiries any family member might make. "How's that new client portfolio you mentioned last week?" I asked while passing the mashed potatoes. David paused mid-bite, looking confused. Which portfolio? The one you said was keeping you late on Tuesdays, I clarified, though I wasn't entirely sure he'd mentioned any such thing. I was testing him. Oh, that one, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's going well. Still requires some extra attention. But the hesitation in his voice, the way his eyes avoided mine, suggested he was scrambling to remember what story he'd told before. The kids were picking up on the tension too, though they didn't understand what was causing it. Emma, normally chatty during family meals, had become quieter, more observant. I caught her watching her parents with worried eyes, especially when they thought no one was looking. Lucas, my 16-year-old grandson, dealt with stress by throwing himself into his schoolwork and basketball practice. He'd always been a good student, but lately he was staying after school for extra study sessions and spending hours in his room with his books. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said he wanted to keep his GPA up for college applications, but I suspected he was finding excuses to avoid the tense atmosphere at home. One Saturday morning, while David was outside supposedly checking something in the garage, Emma approached me in the kitchen. "Grandma Margaret," she said quietly, glancing toward the back door. "Is everything okay with Mom and Dad?" The direct question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "They've been acting weird," she said, her 14-year-old intuition picking up on things the adults thought they were hiding. "Dad seems really stressed all the time, and Mom keeps asking him if he's okay, but he always says he's fine even though he obviously isn't." I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes adults go through difficult periods, honey. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with their relationship. Your parents love each other very much." Emma nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. "I just wish they'd stop pretending everything's normal when it's not." Her words hit me hard, because they were exactly what I'd been thinking. The whole family was walking around pretending everything was fine while the tension grew thicker each day. That's when I decided I needed to do some real investigating. If David wasn't going to tell us what was really going on, maybe I could figure it out myself. My opportunity came the following Monday. David had left for work in his usual rush, grabbing his coffee and briefcase and giving Sarah a quick kiss goodbye. But in his hurry, he'd left his jacket hanging over the back of his chair in the kitchen. It was a gray wool blazer, one of his favorites for client meetings. I told myself I was just going to hang it up properly in the hall closet, but when I picked it up, I felt something in the inside pocket, something that crinkled like paper. I hesitated for a moment. Going through someone's pockets felt like a violation of privacy, even someone I was worried about. But my concern for my family overrode my qualms about snooping. The first thing I found was a business card for someone named Michael Torres, with the title Career Transition Counselor printed below his name. That was odd. Why would David need career counseling if everything was going well at Morrison & Associates? But that wasn't what made my hands start shaking. The second item I found was a folded piece of paper, and when I opened it, my worst fears were confirmed. It was a termination letter from Morrison & Associates, dated 6 weeks ago. David hadn't just been struggling at work or dealing with difficult clients. He'd been fired. 6 weeks ago, and every day since then, he'd been leaving the house pretending to go to a job he no longer had. What I found in his jacket pocket made everything clear. My son-in-law wasn't just keeping a secret about restoring a tea set in the middle of the night. He was keeping a secret that could destroy our family's financial security, and he'd been carrying this burden alone for over a month. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I stood in the kitchen, holding that termination letter with trembling hands, reading it over and over, as if the words might change. Due to company-wide restructuring and budget constraints, your position as senior financial advisor has been eliminated, effective immediately. The date at the top showed it was issued exactly 6 weeks and 3 days ago. 6 weeks. David had been unemployed for 6 weeks, and not one person in this family knew about it. Every morning, he got up, put on his suit, grabbed his briefcase, and left the house as if he were going to Morrison and Associates. Every evening, he came home with stories about his day, client meetings, market discussions, office politics that no longer existed. The weight of this deception was staggering. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, still clutching the letter, trying to process what this meant for our family. David wasn't just keeping a secret about a birthday surprise. He was living an elaborate lie that affected every aspect of our lives. Looking back, so many things suddenly made sense. The erratic schedule I'd been noticing wasn't due to changing work demands. It was because David had nowhere specific to be. He was probably spending his days at the library, in coffee shops, maybe driving around aimlessly, just killing time until it was reasonable to come home. The late bills weren't due to David being busy at work. They were because he was trying to stretch our finances, paying everything at the last possible moment to preserve cash flow. Those hushed phone calls on the back porch weren't about difficult clients. They were probably calls to unemployment offices, job placement services, or potential employers. The anxiety, the distraction, the way he jumped when the phone rang, it all pointed to a man living in constant fear of his secret being discovered. But the most heartbreaking realization was understanding what this was doing to David emotionally. I thought about that night I found him in the kitchen, the shame and fear in his eyes when he thought his secret was out. He'd said that discovering the truth would destroy the family, and now I understood what he meant. In his mind, losing his job made him a failure as a husband and father. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the jacket pocket, my mind racing. What was our real financial situation? If David had been unemployed for 6 weeks, what were we living on? Did we have enough savings to cover the mortgage, the utilities, the kids' expenses? Emma was a sophomore in high school with plans for college in 3 years. Lucas was a junior, already talking about which universities he wanted to apply to next year. The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. Was David receiving unemployment benefits? Was he actively looking for work? Or was he so paralyzed by shame that he was avoiding the job search? How long could we maintain this lifestyle without his income? And most importantly, how long did he plan to keep this charade going? I thought about Sarah, going about her daily routine completely unaware that her world had shifted fundamentally 6 weeks ago. She worked part-time as a medical office manager, bringing in about $30,000 a year. Good supplemental income when David was earning his full salary, but nowhere near enough to support a family of 4 plus me. She deserved to know. She had a right to know that their financial security was gone, that they needed to make serious decisions about their future. But then I thought about David, carrying this burden alone for over a month, probably lying awake at night wondering how he was going to provide for his family. The man I'd seen in the kitchen wasn't just tired from staying up late working on a tea set. He was exhausted from the weight of his deception, from trying to maintain a normal facade while his world was crumbling. My heart broke for him, but I was also angry. How could he put Sarah in this position? How could he make financial decisions without her input, spending money they might not have, maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't afford? Marriage was supposed to be a partnership, but David was handling this crisis like he was single, like his decisions only affected him. And what about the kids? They were picking up on the tension, asking questions, worrying about things they couldn't understand. Emma had asked me directly if something was wrong with her parents. How long before they figured out something major was happening? The more I thought about it, the more I realized the scope of David's deception. This wasn't just about hiding unemployment. This was about hiding from unemployment. Instead of immediately starting a job search, instead of cutting expenses and adjusting the family's lifestyle, instead of working with Sarah to navigate this challenge together, he'd chosen to pretend it wasn't happening. That night at the kitchen sink, when he'd talked about work stress and feeling like a failure, he'd been telling me a version of the truth. He was under enormous pressure, but not from his job, from the absence of his job. He was feeling like a failure, but not because of bad investment decisions. because he'd lost his position and was too ashamed to admit it. The tea-set restoration project took on new meaning, too. David had said it was his escape from work stress, the one thing that made him feel competent. Now I understood it was probably his only source of accomplishment during days that were otherwise empty and purposeless. While Sarah thought he was at the office managing client portfolios, he was actually at home, unemployed, finding meaning in bringing luster back to tarnished silver. I sat in that kitchen for nearly an hour, weighing my options. I could confront David directly, force him to tell Sarah the truth. I could tell Sarah myself, give her the information she needed to protect herself and her children. Or I could keep the secret, give David more time to figure out how to handle this situation himself. None of these options felt right. Confronting David might push him further into denial and deception. Telling Sarah would betray David's trust and potentially devastate their marriage. But keeping the secret felt like I was participating in a lie that was hurting my daughter and grandchildren. The financial implications were terrifying. If David had been unemployed for 6 weeks, and if he'd been maintaining their normal spending patterns, they could be burning through their savings rapidly. The mortgage payment alone was probably close to $2,000 a month. Add utilities, insurance, car payments, groceries, and the kids' expenses, and they were looking at maybe $4,000 to $5,000 in monthly expenses, possibly more. How much did they have saved? David was methodical about finances, but he was also the type to prioritize current comfort over long-term security. They'd bought this house only 3 years ago, taking on a substantial mortgage. They'd renovated the kitchen last year, taken a family vacation to Disney World, bought Lucas a used car for his 16th birthday. These weren't extravagant expenses, but they suggested a family that was spending most of what they earned, rather than building substantial emergency reserves. If they had managed to save 3 to 6 months of expenses, they might have some breathing room. But if they were like most American families, living paycheck to paycheck despite a decent income, they could be facing financial disaster within weeks. The college funds that Sarah and David had been building for the kids were probably the next target. Lucas was supposed to start applying to universities in the fall. Emma was already talking about her plans for after high school. How much of their futures was David willing to sacrifice to maintain the illusion that everything was normal? I thought about my own financial situation. I had Frank's life insurance money, plus our savings, plus the proceeds from selling our house. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help in an emergency. The question was whether this qualified as an emergency, and whether David's pride would allow him to accept help from his mother-in-law. As I sat there in the growing darkness, I realized that David's secret was like a cancer spreading through our family. Every day he maintained this deception, the problem got worse. The financial pressure increased. The emotional toll on everyone grew heavier, and the eventual revelation became more devastating. But the silver tea set was just the beginning of his secret. Because as I thought about David's behavior over the past 6 weeks, I realized there were still pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. His expertise with silver restoration, the professional-grade supplies he was using, the amount of time he was spending on this project, it all suggested something more than just a hobbyist trying to surprise his wife. What else was David hiding? And how much more complicated was this situation going to get before it was resolved? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about David's situation. The termination letter explained so much, but it also raised new questions. If he'd been unemployed for 6 weeks, how were we managing financially? Where was he getting money for those expensive restoration supplies I'd seen in the kitchen? My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to do some more investigating. The next time David left for his pretend workday, I went down to the basement where he'd moved his office to make room for me upstairs. I told myself I was just tidying up, but really, I was looking for clues. What I found there amazed me. The basement office had been transformed into something that looked more like an artist's workshop than a financial advisor's workspace. There were multiple workstations set up with different types of lighting, magnifying glasses, and specialized tools I didn't recognize. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles of polishes, cleaners, and restoration chemicals. There were books about antique identification, metalwork techniques, and restoration methods. But most impressive were the finished pieces. David had completed work on at least a dozen items: silver serving pieces, ornate picture frames, a beautiful antique jewelry box, and several pieces of fine china. Each item had a small tag attached with details about the restoration process and before and after photos. The quality of his work was stunning. These pieces looked like they'd come from a high-end antique shop. On his desk, I found a notebook where David had been meticulously documenting his projects. Each page showed detailed notes about techniques he'd learned, suppliers he'd contacted, and time spent on each piece. More importantly, there were payment records. Small amounts: $150 for restoring a silver tea service for someone named Mrs. Patterson, $275 for refinishing an antique wooden jewelry box for a Mr. Chen, $320 for bringing back the luster on a set of brass candlesticks. David hadn't just been keeping himself busy during his unemployment. He'd been earning money, contributing to the family's finances in the only way he could while maintaining his deception. The amounts were modest, maybe $800 to $200 a month, but every dollar counted when you had no other income coming in. I found business cards from antique dealers, estate sale organizers, and private collectors. There were emails printed out showing correspondence about potential projects, people recommending David's services to their friends, repeat customers asking about his availability for new work. This wasn't just a hobby that had accidentally turned profitable. David was building a legitimate business. The most telling discovery was a folder labeled Career Transition. Inside were printouts from websites about starting small businesses, articles about turning hobbies into income streams, and information about licensing requirements for antique restoration services. David had been researching this seriously, not just stumbling into it by accident. There was also a handwritten list titled Pros and Cons. Under pros, he'd written things like genuinely enjoy the work, natural talent for detailed restoration, growing client base through word of mouth, and potential for higher hourly income than financial planning. Under cons, he'd listed inconsistent income, physical demands of detailed work. Would Sarah understand? And starting over at 42. That last item broke my heart. David wasn't just dealing with unemployment. He was grappling with the possibility of completely changing careers in middle age. The financial planning career he'd built over 15 years was gone, and he was wondering if he could start over in an entirely different field. But as I looked around that basement workshop, I could see something that David maybe couldn't see himself yet. This wasn't just a desperate attempt to make ends meet during a period of unemployment. This was someone who had discovered their true calling. I remembered my own experience with crafting after Frank died. I'd started doing needlework and quilting just to keep my hands busy during those long, lonely evenings. But gradually I'd realized I had a real talent for it. People started asking me to make things for them, to teach them techniques I'd developed. What had started as therapy had become a source of both income and genuine satisfaction. David's meticulous documentation showed the same progression. His early pieces were good but simple. His recent work showed increasingly sophisticated techniques and more challenging projects. He was pushing himself to learn new skills, taking on more complex restorations, building relationships with clients who trusted him with valuable family heirlooms. The tea set upstairs wasn't just practice for Sarah's birthday surprise. It was David's masterpiece, the culmination of months of skill development and technique refinement. He'd been using his own family heirloom to perfect his craft, knowing that if he could restore something so precious and meaningful, he could handle any client's treasured possessions. I found email exchanges where clients were effusive in their praise. Mrs. Patterson wrote, "I never thought my grandmother's tea service could look so beautiful again. You've given me back a piece of my family's history." Mr. Chen said, "Your attention to detail is remarkable. This jewelry box looks exactly like it did when my wife inherited it from her mother 50 years ago." These weren't just thank you notes for adequate service. These were testimonials from people who had trusted David with their most precious possessions and been amazed by the results. He wasn't just competent at this work, he was exceptional. But I could also understand his conflicted feelings. David had spent his adult life in the corporate world, where success was measured by salary, title, and the respect of colleagues. Financial planning was a prestigious profession that commanded good money and social recognition. Antique restoration, no matter how skillful, might feel like a step down to someone who'd built his identity around being a successful businessman. There was also the practical concern about income stability. Financial planning, when done well, provided steady monthly income from fees and commissions. Restoration work was project-based, unpredictable, dependent on finding clients and building reputation. Even if David could eventually earn good money from it, the transition period would be financially challenging for a family with our obligations. As I stood in that basement workshop, surrounded by evidence of David's hidden talent and secret business, I felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. Admiration for his skill, his work ethic, and his determination to contribute to the family's finances even while unemployed. Frustration that he was carrying this burden alone, instead of sharing it with people who could support and help him. I thought about Sarah upstairs, probably worrying about David's strange behavior, having no idea that her husband was not only unemployed, but also potentially embarking on an entirely new career path. She had a right to be part of these decisions, to understand the financial reality they were facing, to support David as he navigated this transition. But I also understood David's shame and uncertainty. He was probably wondering if this restoration work was just a temporary way to earn some money during unemployment, or if it could become a real career. He was probably afraid that admitting he'd lost his job would make him look like a failure, especially if he then said he wanted to abandon his professional career to become what some might consider a craftsman. The evidence in that basement suggested David had found more than just a way to make ends meet. He'd found work that engaged him, challenged him, and brought genuine satisfaction. But he was too afraid and ashamed to share this discovery with the people who loved him most. Looking around that workshop one more time, I realized that David's secret was even more complex than I'd originally thought. It wasn't just about unemployment and deception. It was about identity, purpose, and the courage to change direction in middle age. And it was about a family that needed to come together to navigate this transition, instead of one person trying to handle it alone. After discovering David's basement workshop and understanding the full scope of his secret life, I knew I couldn't keep this information to myself any longer. Sarah deserved to know what was happening in her own home, and David needed support, not continued isolation. But I also knew that revealing these secrets would either bring our family closer together or tear it apart completely. I waited until the next evening, when David was home and the kids were upstairs doing homework. Sarah was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, and David was in the living room watching the news with that distracted expression he'd worn for weeks. This was as good a time as any to have the conversation that would change everything. "Sarah, David," I said, walking into the living room with my hands clasped in front of me. "We need to talk, all of us. Right now." Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the moment, because David immediately muted the television and Sarah appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in her hands. "What's wrong, Mom?" Sarah asked, concern clear in her voice. I looked at David, giving him one last chance to tell his own story. "David, I think you should be the one to explain." His face went pale. He knew exactly what I was referring to, and I could see the panic in his eyes. "Margaret, please," he said quietly. "Not like this." "Not like what?" Sarah asked, looking between us with growing alarm. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. This was it. "Sarah, your husband lost his job 6 weeks ago. He's been pretending to go to work every day while actually spending his time building an antique restoration business in our basement." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, the dish towel slowly slipping from her hands to the floor. David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "What?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Then louder. "What did you just say?" David looked up, his eyes red with unshed tears. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what?" Sarah's shock was rapidly transforming into anger. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 6 weeks? Explain how you've been leaving this house every morning pretending to go to a job that doesn't exist?" "I didn't know how to tell you," David said, his voice breaking. "I was so ashamed. I failed, Sarah. I failed as a provider, as a husband, as a father. And you thought lying was better." Sarah's voice was rising, and I could hear footsteps upstairs as Emma and Lucas reacted to the commotion. "You thought keeping me in the dark while our financial world collapsed was the right choice?" David stood up, reaching toward her. "I've been trying to fix it. I've been working, earning money through the restoration business. I thought if I could just get back on my feet." "How much money, David?" Sarah demanded. "How much have you been earning from this secret business while I've been completely unaware that we have no income?" "About $1,000 a month," David admitted quietly. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. $1,000? Our mortgage alone is $1,800. "David, what have we been living on?" "Our savings," he said, looking down at the floor. "And my unemployment benefits." "Unemployment benefits that I knew nothing about because you've been hiding everything from me." Sarah's anger was fully unleashed now. "How much is left, David? How much of our savings is gone?" Before David could answer, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mom? Dad? What's happening? Why are you yelling?" Sarah looked up at her daughter, then back at David, her face a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "Your father lost his job 6 weeks ago and decided not to tell anyone in this family." "Sarah, please," David pleaded. "Not in front of the kids." But it was too late. Lucas had joined his sister at the top of the stairs, and both teenagers were staring down at us with wide eyes, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Come down here," Sarah said to them, her voice hollow. "You might as well hear this. Apparently, I'm the only one in this family who's been living in ignorance." Emma and Lucas slowly descended the stairs, fear clear on their young faces. They sat together on the couch, instinctively moving closer to each other in the face of their parents' crisis. "I trusted you," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "For 12 years of marriage, I trusted you to be honest with me, to include me in the major decisions that affect our family. And you repaid that trust by lying to me every single day for 6 weeks." David was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "I was so scared, Sarah. When they told me my position was eliminated, I felt like my whole identity disappeared. I didn't know how to come home and tell you that I was worthless, that I couldn't provide for my family anymore." "Worthless?" Sarah's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by confusion. "David, losing your job doesn't make you worthless. Companies downsize all the time. People get laid off. It's not a reflection of your value as a person." "But I was supposed to take care of everyone," David sobbed. "My father always said a man's worth is measured by his ability to provide for his family. And I couldn't do that anymore." Emma, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, that's stupid." Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by her directness. "I mean," she continued, "that's a really old-fashioned way to think. Mom works too. We're all part of this family. Why would you think you had to handle this alone?" Lucas nodded. "Dad, we know you work hard. We know you love us. Losing your job doesn't change that." Sarah sank into the chair across from David, the fight going out of her as she looked at her children's mature responses to the crisis. "They're right, David. But what hurts isn't that you lost your job. What hurts is that you didn't trust me enough to tell me. You didn't trust us enough to face this together." "And you," she said, turning to me. "How long have you known about this?" I felt my own guilt rise. "I found the termination letter 3 days ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do with the information." "So both of you knew that our family was in crisis, and both of you decided not to tell me." Sarah's voice was quiet now, but somehow that was more devastating than her anger. The room fell silent except for David's quiet crying. Emma got up from the couch and walked over to her father, putting her arms around him. "It's okay, Dad," she said softly. "We'll figure it out." Lucas joined them, awkwardly patting his father's shoulder. "Yeah, Dad. Families stick together, right?" Sarah watched her children comfort their father, and I saw her expression begin to soften. The anger was still there, but it was mixing with something else. Love, determination, and maybe even relief that the secrets were finally out in the open. "David," she said finally, "look at me." He raised his head, his face blotchy from crying. "I love you," she said. "I married you for better or worse, remember? This is definitely worse, but that doesn't mean we can't handle it. But if we're going to get through this, no more lies. No more secrets. We face everything together from now on." David nodded, unable to speak. "And I want to see this workshop," Sarah continued. "I want to understand what you've been doing, what you've been building while you've been carrying this burden alone. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Because when Sarah saw David's work, when she understood the skill and passion he'd discovered in himself, everything changed again. The next morning, after a night of little sleep for anyone in our household, Sarah asked David to show her the basement workshop. I watched from the kitchen window as they went down the exterior basement stairs together, Sarah's hand resting gently on David's shoulder. The anger from the night before had transformed into something else. A determination to understand what her husband had been building in secret. When they came back upstairs an hour later, Sarah's entire demeanor had changed. Her eyes were bright with amazement, and she was carrying one of David's restored pieces, an ornate silver serving tray that gleamed like new. "Mom, you have to see what David's accomplished down there," Sarah said, setting the tray on the kitchen counter where the morning light made it sparkle. "This isn't just a hobby. This is professional-level work." David stood beside her, looking cautiously hopeful for the first time in weeks. "I know it's not the same as my old salary," he began, but Sarah held up her hand. "David, forget about your old salary for a minute. Look at this." She gestured to the tray. "Mrs. Henderson down the street has been trying to find someone to restore her grandmother's china set for months. She's called 3 different antique dealers, and they all said it was too delicate, too risky. But you could do this work." I set down my coffee cup and really looked at the tray Sarah had brought up. The detail work was extraordinary. Every etched flower and vine had been brought back to crisp definition, and the silver had a warm luster that spoke of careful, patient craftsmanship. "David," I said, "I need to tell you something. When I discovered your workshop, I wasn't just surprised by what you were hiding. I was impressed by what you'd created. This reminds me of when I started quilting seriously after your father-in-law died." Sarah looked at me curiously. "What do you mean?" I sat down at the kitchen table, motioning for them to join me. After Frank passed, I felt lost. I'd been a wife and mother for so many years, and suddenly I had to figure out who I was on my own. I started quilting just to keep my hands busy, but then I discovered I had a real talent for it. People started commissioning pieces, and before I knew it, I was earning more from my quilts than Frank had made at his part-time job in retirement. David leaned forward, interested despite his worry. "Really?" "The point is," I continued, "sometimes life forces us to discover talents we never knew we had. Sometimes losing one path helps us find the right path." Just then, Emma and Lucas came downstairs, still looking a bit shell-shocked from the previous night's revelations. Emma went straight to her father and gave him a hug. "Dad, Lucas and I were talking last night," she said. "We want to help." "Help how, sweetheart?" David asked. Lucas pulled out his phone and showed us a screen. "I made an Instagram account for your business. Look, Thompson Family Restorations. I took pictures of all your work from downstairs and posted them with descriptions of what you did." Lucas, you can't just... Sarah started, then stopped as she saw the screen. Oh my goodness, how many likes does this have already? 47, and it's only been up for 12 hours, Lucas said proudly. And look at the comments. Mrs. Patterson shared it, and 3 people have already asked about getting work done. Emma pulled out a notebook. And I made a list of everyone we know who has antique stuff. There's Mrs. Henderson's china, Mr. Rodriguez's brass lamp collection. The Williamses have that old piano bench with the metal hinges that are all tarnished. Sarah looked at our children with amazement. You 2 did all this last night? We're not little kids anymore, Mom, Emma said matter-of-factly. We understand that families have to work together when things get tough. David's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different tears than the night before. I'm so sorry I tried to handle this alone. I should have trusted all of you from the beginning. You should have, Sarah agreed, but we can't change that now. What we can do is move forward together. She pulled out her own notebook. Apparently planning ran in the family. I've been thinking about this all night. David, your restoration skills are genuine. You have satisfied customers and word-of-mouth referrals, but we need to approach this like a real business. Over the next 2 hours, we had the most productive family meeting I'd ever witnessed. Sarah, with her administrative background, talked about business licenses, insurance, proper record-keeping. Emma suggested setting up a simple website and social media presence. Lucas offered to handle photography and social media management. I volunteered to help with the detailed handwork that David's arthritis sometimes made difficult. What about money for startup costs? David asked. Professional equipment, business registration, insurance. It could cost thousands. I stood up and went to my purse. I have some savings put aside, I said, pulling out my checkbook. Frank always said money sitting in the bank isn't helping anyone. Consider this an investment in Thompson Family Restorations, Sarah protested. Mom, we can't take your retirement money. It's not a gift, I clarified. It's a business investment. I want to be a partner in this venture. I'll contribute capital and labor, and I expect a return on my investment. David stared at me. You want to go into business with me? With us, I corrected. This is going to be a family business. We'll all contribute our skills and share in the success. That afternoon, Sarah called her boss and arranged to work full-time instead of part-time, at least temporarily, to ensure steady income while we built the restoration business. David made a list of all his current and potential clients, organizing them by project size and potential income. The most surprising development came when Sarah called Mrs. Henderson about her china set. Not only did Mrs. Henderson want the work done, but she offered to host a small gathering where David could display his work and meet other potential clients. It's like a Tupperware party, Sarah explained, but for antique restoration. By evening, we had a business plan, a family mission, and something we hadn't had in weeks: hope. David was still unemployed. We still faced financial challenges, but we were facing them together as a family unit, instead of David carrying the burden alone. You know what I realize? Sarah said as we cleaned up the dinner dishes together. David losing his job might have been the best thing that could have happened to us. Not because unemployment is good, but because it forced us to discover something about David and about our family that we never would have found otherwise. David wrapped his arms around his wife. I promise, no more secrets. No more trying to protect you from our problems. We're partners in everything from now on. Emma looked up from her homework at the kitchen table. So does this mean we're going to be rich? We all laughed, the first real laughter our house had heard in weeks. We're going to be fine, Sarah said. Maybe not rich, but definitely fine. And we're going to do it together. 3 months after that explosive family meeting in our living room, Thompson Family Restorations was no longer just a dream scribbled on notebook paper. It was a legitimate business with a growing client base, a professional workshop, and a family working together toward a common goal. David had transformed the entire basement into a proper restoration studio. With the startup money I'd invested, we purchased professional-grade lighting systems, specialized tools, and a comprehensive inventory of restoration supplies. The space now had distinct work areas, one for silver and metal restoration, another for ceramic and porcelain work, and a third section dedicated to wooden pieces and furniture refinishing. My role in the business had evolved beyond what any of us initially expected. While David handled the technical restoration work, I discovered that my years of detailed needlework and crafts had given me skills that were invaluable in antique restoration. I became the specialist for textile restoration, cleaning and repairing antique linens, tapestries, and upholstery. My steady hands were also perfect for the most delicate aspects of china restoration, painting in tiny details that David's slightly arthritic fingers sometimes struggled with. "Margaret, you're a natural at this," David said one afternoon as I carefully repaired a hairline crack in a 19th century teacup. "I never realized how much patience and precision your quilting required until I watched you work on these pieces. We made a perfect team." David brought the technical knowledge and business relationships, while I provided the fine detail work and an understanding of historical craftsmanship that came from years of working with vintage patterns and techniques. Sarah had stepped into her role as business manager with enthusiasm that surprised everyone, including herself. She'd increased her hours at the medical office to full-time, bringing in steady income while the restoration business grew. But more than that, she'd discovered she had a talent for client relations and business development. "I never realized how much I enjoyed the business side of things," she told me, one evening as she organized client files and scheduled project timelines. "At the medical office, I was just processing insurance claims and scheduling appointments. But with our business, I'm building relationships, solving problems, creating something meaningful." She'd established relationships with estate sale companies, antique dealers, and auction houses throughout the Portland area. Her professional demeanor and genuine enthusiasm for the restoration work made her a perfect ambassador for the business. Clients trusted her completely, and she had a gift for explaining technical restoration processes in terms that non-experts could understand. The children had embraced their roles with maturity that made me incredibly proud. Lucas had turned social media management into an art form. His Instagram posts showcasing before and after restoration work were getting hundreds of likes and generating steady inquiries from potential clients. He'd learned to photograph antiques in ways that highlighted both their original beauty and the skill required to restore them. "Grandma, look at this," Lucas said, showing me his phone screen. The post about Dad restoring Mrs. Chen's jewelry box has been shared 47 times. 3 different people have messaged us about similar projects. Emma had taken on client research and historical documentation. For each piece we restored, she researched its origins, historical period, and original manufacturing techniques. This information not only helped with the restoration process, but also provided clients with detailed reports about their family heirlooms that they treasured, almost as much as the restored pieces themselves. But, perhaps most importantly, Emma had gotten her first part-time job at a local coffee shop, contributing her earnings to the family budget. At 15, she was learning about work, responsibility, and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than herself. "I like knowing that my paycheck helps our family," she said one Saturday morning before heading to work. "It makes me feel like I'm really part of making this business succeed." The community response to David's work had exceeded all our expectations. Mrs. Henderson's China restoration party had led to 6 new clients and recommendations that spread throughout her social network. Word of mouth brought us customers from as far as Salem and Eugene, people who drove hours to bring us family treasures they trusted no one else to handle. One of our most significant success stories came from an unexpected source. The local historical society had heard about David's work and brought him a collection of tarnished silver pieces from a Victorian-era house they were restoring. The project took 6 weeks and paid more than David had earned in some months at his previous job. Mr. Thompson, the Historical Society director said when he picked up the completed pieces. This work is museum quality. We'd like to put you on retainer for all our restoration needs. That contract alone provided steady monthly income that took enormous pressure off our finances. But more importantly, it gave David recognition within the professional restoration community. He wasn't just a laid-off financial advisor trying to make ends meet anymore. He was a skilled craftsman whose work was valued by institutions that preserved historical artifacts. The financial recovery had been slower than we'd hoped, but steadier than we'd feared. We weren't back to our previous income level, but we were covering expenses, slowly rebuilding savings, and most importantly, we were doing it together as a family unit. I ran the numbers last night, Sarah announced during one of our weekly family business meetings. Between my salary, David's restoration income, Emma's coffee shop earnings, and the retainer from the Historical Society, we're actually in better financial shape than we were 6 months ago. David looked up from the antique clock he was working on, surprise clear on his face. Really? Really, Sarah confirmed. We're spending less on unnecessary things, earning more per hour on the restoration work than you were making at Morrison & Associates. And we have multiple income streams instead of depending on one job. But the most profound transformation had been in David and Sarah's marriage. The crisis that could have destroyed their relationship had instead made it stronger. They were communicating more openly, sharing responsibilities more equitably, and working towards shared goals in ways they never had before. You know what I realized? Sarah said one evening as we all worked together in the basement workshop. David restoring a silver tea service, me mending an antique tablecloth, Sarah organizing client files, and the kids doing homework at the workbench. When David had his corporate job, we were like parallel lines. We lived in the same house, but we were each focused on our separate responsibilities. Now we're actually building something together. David looked up from his work, silver polish on his hands and genuine happiness in his eyes. I never thought losing my job would lead to this. I thought it would be the worst thing that ever happened to our family. It was scary, Emma said without looking up from her history textbook. But it wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing would have been if you'd kept lying to us. Lucas nodded. Yeah, Dad. The unemployment was just a problem to solve. The lying was what made it feel like everything was falling apart. David set down his polishing cloth and looked around at all of us. I spent so many years thinking that my value as a husband and father depended on my salary, on being able to provide a certain lifestyle. I never realized that what you really needed was honesty, partnership, and the security of knowing we were all in this together. 6 months after that midnight discovery in our kitchen, I was sitting on our front porch on a warm August evening, watching David load carefully wrapped antique pieces into his van for delivery to clients. Thompson Family Restorations had grown beyond anything we'd imagined when we first sat around our kitchen table making desperate plans. The transformation in our family was complete, but it was Sarah's birthday that truly brought everything full circle. David had kept that silver tea set hidden away, continuing to perfect his restoration work on it, even as our family business grew. On the morning of Sarah's 41st birthday, he finally brought it upstairs, fully restored to its original magnificence. Sarah, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he set the gleaming tea service on our dining room table. This is what I was working on that night Mom found me in the kitchen. This is what started everything. Sarah ran her fingers over the intricate engravings, tears streaming down her face. The silver caught the morning sunlight, each detail crisp and beautiful, every surface reflecting light like mirrors. It was more than just a restored antique. It was a symbol of our family's journey from deception and fear to honesty and strength. It's perfect, she whispered. But David, the real gift isn't the tea set. The real gift is everything that happened, because you were working on it. Everything we discovered about ourselves, about our family, about what we're capable of when we work together. The business had indeed grown beyond our wildest expectations. David now had a 6-month waiting list for his restoration services. The Historical Society had recommended him to 3 other museums, and he'd been featured in Portland Monthly magazine as one of the region's premier antique restoration specialists. What had started as a desperate attempt to earn grocery money had become a thriving enterprise that employed our entire family. But the success wasn't just measured in dollars. Emma had been accepted to a prestigious summer program for young entrepreneurs, based largely on her work documenting and researching our restoration projects. Lucas had been offered an internship at a digital marketing firm after they saw his social media work for our business. Both kids were not just contributing to our family's recovery. They were building skills and experiences that would serve them throughout their lives. My own role had evolved as well. At 71, I discovered talents I never knew I possessed, and found a sense of purpose I'd lost when Frank died. Working alongside David on delicate restoration projects, teaching Emma about historical textile techniques, helping Sarah manage the growing administrative demands of the business. I felt more useful and engaged than I had in years. You know what I learned through all of this? I said to Sarah one evening as we organized client files in what used to be David's corporate office space. I learned that it's never too late to start over, to discover new talents, to build something meaningful. I thought my productive years were behind me when Frank died, but this family crisis showed me I still had contributions to make. The financial recovery had been remarkable. Not only were we back to our previous income level, but we were exceeding it. More importantly, we had diversified income sources that provided security in a way David's corporate job never had. If one client canceled a project, we had others to fall back on. If the Historical Society changed its budget, we still had individual clients and estate sale companies bringing us work. David's relationship with work had been completely transformed. Instead of dragging himself to an office to manage other people's money while struggling with market pressures and corporate politics, he now woke up excited about the projects waiting in his workshop. Each piece he restored was a puzzle to solve, a challenge to meet, a work of art to create. I never understood what people meant when they talked about finding your passion until now, David told me one afternoon as he put the finishing touches on an ornate Victorian mirror frame. I always thought work was just something you did to pay the bills. I never imagined it could be something that energized you, something you looked forward to every day. The strengthening of David and Sarah's marriage had been perhaps the most beautiful aspect of our family's transformation. The crisis that could have destroyed their relationship had instead taught them the value of complete honesty, shared goals, and mutual support. They weren't just married anymore. They were true partners in every sense of the word. I used to think a good marriage meant never fighting, never having problems, Sarah reflected during one of our evening conversations. But I've learned that a strong marriage is one where you face problems together, where you support each other through difficulties, where you build something meaningful as a team. The kids had learned lessons about family, responsibility, and resilience that no amount of comfortable suburban living could have taught them. They'd seen their parents face a genuine crisis and respond with creativity, hard work, and mutual support. They'd learned that families can survive devastating setbacks and emerge stronger than before. As I sat on the porch that evening, watching David carefully load a restored grandfather clock into his delivery van, I reflected on the lessons this experience had taught all of us. We'd learned that honesty, even painful honesty, is always better than deception. We'd learned that family strength isn't measured by the size of the bank account, but by the willingness to support each other through difficulties. We'd learned that sometimes what appears to be a disaster is actually an opportunity in disguise. Most importantly, we'd learned that it's never too late to change direction, to discover new talents, to build something meaningful from the pieces of what seemed broken. David's unemployment, which felt like the end of the world when it happened, had led him to work that fulfilled him in ways his corporate career never had. My move into the family home, which I'd worried would make me a burden, had given me a new sense of purpose and usefulness. The silver tea set now sits in a place of honor on our dining room sideboard, polished and gleaming, used for special occasions and Sunday afternoon family meetings. But its real value isn't as an antique or even as a beautiful object. Its value is as a reminder of what our family can accomplish when we're honest with each other, when we work together, when we refuse to let fear and pride prevent us from asking for help. Looking toward the future, we have plans that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. David is considering hiring an assistant to help with the growing workload. Sarah is exploring the possibility of quitting her medical office job to focus entirely on managing our business. Emma and Lucas are both planning to study business in college, with the goal of eventually taking over Thompson Family Restorations. Sometimes what looks like the worst thing that could happen to a family is actually the best thing in disguise. David losing his job felt like a catastrophe, but it led us to discoveries about ourselves, our capabilities, and our bonds that we never would have made otherwise. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to this channel for more real family stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. And please share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced a family crisis that turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Have you discovered talents or strengths you didn't know you had? I'd love to hear your stories of resilience and family unity. Until next time, remember that families are like antique treasures. Sometimes they get tarnished by life's challenges, but with patience, care, and the right tools, they can be restored to shine more beautifully than ever before.